you're probably going to be thinking about ways in which you can do teacher-directed guided play. So this is when you focus on a defined skill, an early learning standard, and use play elements to actively engage students in learning. So teachers will scaffold, so again, a very Vygotskian word there. We're going to scaffold by structuring the environment. So it could be what things I put in the environment, the kind of challenges I ask kids to engage in, whatever that is, that environment. Or I can do it by providing sensitive feedback and asking really good questions to get them to that goal. So this would be kind of like that last challenge with the little boys trying to articulate their thinking, if that was the goal. But this time, I've purposefully set an activity in place to meet that goal. So when you're doing lesson planning, this is predominantly what you're going to do. You're going to start with your goal in mind. You're going to pick out what early learning standards you're meeting. You're going to talk about, in your lesson plan, what's leading up to this, and then you're going to plan out a specific lesson that's geared towards this. And you're going to think about how do you do it in a way that's hands-on, that is authentic, and that has an element of play and construction. So one way you can do this then is this is where I said, okay, play is ill-defined, but we're going to try to talk about how kids view play. So this is the case where you've got a goal in mind and you're going to use play as the carrot, right, to get them to kind of push them towards to want to learn that goal. So lucky for you, kids can distinguish between work and play. So my dissertation work was actually on looking at if I gave kids, little kids, 3-year-olds, a bunch of theoretically toys, and I asked them to play with the toys or I asked them to memorize the toys. Kids differentiate that. If my goal is memorizing what these items are, I use very different strategies than if I'm told to play with them. So kids know, and kindergartners really know, what is the difference between work and play. And so they use a lot of cues in your classroom. So when you're thinking about what you're doing and designing lessons, this is a way you can balance it. You can think about how can I design things that look like play, even though I've got a learning goal in mind, versus those things that are work. So with play, there's emotional cues in the environment. So kids will distinguish that if I get to choose that thing, or if I have an element of choice in there, it doesn't have to be completely at their will, but that if you get to choose like whether or not you play with the tambourine or you play with the drum, you're making that choice, right? That it's under their control, so there's a sense of element of autonomy that they're making some choice in that. So even though you've got a goal in mind, there's some sense of voluntary autonomy. They view it as being easy, because work, on the other hand, is something that's hard. It's something that I have to really like work at and like sustain my focus, right? So they want it to be easy and they want it to be fun. So think about how you can add that element into it. In terms of environmental cues, things that you might want to think about as simple as putting it on the floor instead of having it at a table. Because when I sit at a table, it's work. But when I'm on the floor, it's play. So I can read my book in that comfy rocking chair. I love those little rocking chairs, the plastic ones. That makes it a lot more fun and not so much work as if I have to sit at my desk and read that book. It could be a lack of adult involvement, so you're there as a support and a guide, you're not direct instructing. They don't feel like you're evaluating them, because a lot of times if you're doing a worksheet, I'm going to get a mark on it. But if I'm doing observations of my kids engaging in an activity, and I'm taking photographs for documentation and assessment, they don't see that evaluation piece that you're doing. They don't think about it as having a finished product. When we do work, there's like a goal in mind. There's like, I've got to get this worksheet done, right? Or I've got to finish reading every word in this book, right? Whereas with play, they see it as being more open-ended and exploratory. And there's also this physical hands-on component. So the more you can make something hands-on and active, the more the kids are going to view it as play. And so this is just in contrast to work. So, they'll view things as being more work and less motivating if it's compulsory, so they have no choice. Now, that's not to say that I'm running small group centers and I've got my group that I'm facilitating direct, like a more targeted instruction on. It's compulsory that they come to me, but I can still have an element of under the child's control when I'm doing that small group center, or that small group. They see it as being completely under the adult's control, so the more you can give them a sense of autonomy. They see it as being hard, and then it might be fun.
So even though it's play-based learning, should you differentiate when you're talking to children that, okay, this is PlayStations, or is this
I wouldn't.
workstations, or can play be work?
Play could be work.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't differentiate this is a play
Okay.
thing, this is a work thing, this is an academic task, this is development. They don't.
Because I call my stations workstations, but it's a lot of hands-on activities.
Yeah, and I might, I don't think they're gonna differentiate like
Okay.
work in that sense, like it's
Okay.
not the same meaning.
Okay.
So I think if you still call them workstations,
Yeah.
that would be fine.
Okay.
It's more of the, are you having these
Right.
kind of underlying cues?
Gotcha, that's for
Yeah, and I can give an example of something that could be work that you can make it a lot more hands-on. So I have one of the classrooms I visited recently, they were reading a book about the fidgets. And so what they had as a story, they were reading to their kids, and then each kid in the whole group had a different card with a word on it. And every time their word was said, they had to stand up, spin around, and sit down. And so that became something that was hands-on and active. It wasn't just passively reading. I'm now looking for a cue in that. I have a job. My job is every time that Mr. Fidget's name is said, I get up, I stand up, I turn around, and I sit down. Right? So it could be just tweaking in a little bit of this like element of like having control over something they're doing in that environment that makes it being just passive to making it active. Other things that, again, are these inverse environmental cues, that it's at a table. So tables are great, and tables are necessary, in particular if you're working on fine motor skills and writing. But just think about like that, if you can vary that, that might not be such a bad thing. So not all centers need to be on the floor, but maybe thinking about how you can make it differentiate a little bit more. In particular, when classrooms are very limited in space, we want to think about that. It can, and then they see things as being sedentary. They see a lot more about this idea that there's this endpoint and evaluation piece. So that's kind of the inverse. So we can think about, I've got a goal in mind, how can I make things more look like this and less like that so that that's a carrot for them? Here is an example. I'm just going to show a little bit of something that's more teacher directed. But I won't show the whole thing.
Their question is this song faster because the marble moves faster or because the chimes are closer together? Chimes.
Well, I think
So this one is to downness, so it's fast. And this one is to upness, so it's slow. So, okay, hold on, we're agreeing that these chimes are going to stay right where they are. What can we do to one of these ramps to make it either faster or slower? Are you guys going to make it just as fast as that one up there? Do you guys agree to that? Look, Harriet is saying if we change this so that it's a faster ramp, then it will be a faster song. Do you guys agree with that? It'll be just like the one on top. Okay, put on the Lord's way. We're going to listen to how... We need to use our ears right now. Are we ready? Listen to Harriet. Okay, that was that one. Is it going to sound exactly like the one on top now?
Okay. So this is another problem-solving activity. Everything we've watched to this point are big kids like trying to come up with some solution or some problem-solving. But this one's a lot more under the teacher's control, right? There's a specific goal in mind that you're trying to give them these principles of how the steepness of the slope causes this marble to change in speed, right? So basic principles of, physics, right? But I've got a very specific goal in mind, and I've structured an activity. I'm asking specific types of questions to get them to understand that concept. Does that make sense? But yet it's still very playful, right? There's musical elements, there's, you get to challenge yourself, she gets to move the ramp, all those kinds of small little elements get to be put in play. So teacher-directed play can include any sort of like pre-designed mathematics games you might have. Games are a great playful way to teach content. There's a lot of really great games out there, like I Have, Who Has. It's a great activity, right? And it's got that playful element. You can think about, I mentioned earlier that we did the stuff where we were incorporating work to incorporate vocabulary and literacy goals into play and exploration. So I have specific vocabulary words I want kids to use, so I'm going to create a center that has things that cue that vocabulary, and I'm going to reinforce kids to use that vocabulary. It can also be identifying manipulatives that lead to exploration and knowledge construction. So I've got a specific set of things, like my little counting bears, and I'm going to design a specific lesson around creating patterns, and you create a pattern and I match a pattern. So that kind of give and take kind of playful element.
I just have a question about the boxed programs that aren't play-based. So if you're talking a lot about teacher-created lessons, but if you've got boxed programs, that's not teacher-created.
So you could think of, I'm going to encourage you to think about if you've got that curriculum, and if it doesn't already have like built-in things. So some of them do, like I think about everyday math, like they've got the center in the morning where you've got the like little part of the wall. There are elements in there, right? The kids are adding to it. They're, counting down. They're adding a marble for the day. They're carrying it over. We're having a conversation about it. So some of them do have that. It might be not as playful as you would like, but there is that element of play. But what you'll have to do, you're right, because that's not built in necessarily to all curriculums, is I would say try to encourage ways in which you can just tweak what you've already got and just add that element. So maybe going back to this kind of thing where you're thinking about how might I take that lesson, instead of doing it on a worksheet, maybe I do it with math manipulatives or something like that, so it's a little bit more hands-on and constructive. Or we take and make a long chain to count to 100, or instead of using just the little Unifix blocks, like the small little plastic ones. So I would say you could take that and try to tweak it some and try to add in those elements. But that's where something like reaching out to somebody to help you think through that, and specifically, this is my curriculum, how can I alter this? Or how can I tweak this? Because I wouldn't say abandon it because it's something you used and have probably used, but how might we layer on some additional elements into that? And not everything you do is going to be play-based, right? I'm not saying your whole day has to be focused on this, but it's thinking about that there's a balance between direct instruction and more targeted passive instruction and hands-on active learning, and how do we balance that? But I would say that that's one of those things, like reach out to us if you want to help with thinking about those questions. That's, targeted professional development for that. Yeah. Great question though. Did that help at all?
Somewhat.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that you're just going to have to work out in conjunction. Because it really, I think, depends on the curriculum that you're using too.
All right.